But this is the Easter week, and it's a time when we remember both the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus. They really were the one event. I mean, if there'd just been a crucifixion and no resurrection, then Jesus was just a martyr. And if there's just a resurrection but no crucifixion, well, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. To try and cover both in the one reflection would seem well nigh impossible, so I'm going to do two, one on the crucifixion and one on the resurrection. And even then, just a short reflection is really hardly do justice to each or either of the events. In the last reflection, we saw how Jesus had deliberately chosen to ride into Jerusalem. It was the Passover festival, but he knew that he was on a collision course with the Jewish authorities, and he knew that it was going to end in his death. Now, the Passover festival was remembering how the people in Egypt were slaves, and God had freed them from slavery. He'd sent 10 plagues on the Egyptians, and each time that Pharaoh said, yes, they can go, and God would reverse the plague, then Pharaoh said, oh no, they can't go. So this final one was he was going to send the angel of death through all of Egypt, and the firstborn of every household would die. And so he told the Hebrew people to slaughter a lamb and make a meal of it, but to use some of the blood and paint it on their doorposts, so that when the angel went through Egypt, he would pass over the houses that had blood on the doorpost. And so the people were saved by the blood of the lamb, and they were set free to go on their journey to the promised land. As they went through the desert, God gave them instructions on how to live, what he wanted of them. And part of those instructions were very detailed instructions of building a tabernacle, a place of worship. Now, a most important part of that was a big altar where sacrifice could be made. And that altar was right inside the gateway of the tabernacle. So it's the first thing you would see when you entered there. But also the smoke would be seen from all around, because this was a place where people could make sacrifice for their sin. So it would be an atoning for their sin. And that fact that it was right at the entrance and that the smoke was always visible was a reminder to them that you cannot enter the presence of a holy God without dealing with sin. So they were being reminded through this time that their disobedience cost life. Yes, God allowed the substitution of an animal, but it still cost a life. Now, another aspect of life with God was that whenever you made a covenant with them, it would be sealed in blood. Again, it would be the blood of an animal that would be sacrificed. But the important thing was it was saying that a covenant with God cannot be broken. And if it's broken, it leads to death, because the blood represents life. We come to the time of Jesus. He came to show us what God is like. John 14:9, he said to the disciple Philip, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. But he also came into the world to deal once and for all with human disobedience. And the only way to do that was that disobedience had to be paid for. The life of an animal is never sufficient to pay for the debt that we owe God. Hebrews 10:4 says, it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. These were just there as a constant reminder of the cost of our disobedience. But Jesus was to be the perfect sacrifice. Jesus did not have his life taken from him. He willingly gave it. When he was arrested, Peter pulled out a sword and attacked one of the guys who'd come to arrest Jesus. And Jesus said, no, Peter, put away your sword. Shall I not drink the cup my Father has given me? And then in Matthew, he recorded a little bit differently. He says to Peter, do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scripture be fulfilled that says it must happen this way? So Jesus was willingly giving his life. We have the passage where he went aside for a little while to pray, and he says, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, but not as I will, but as you will. We also read that there were drops of blood coming out of his sweat glands, and that shows tremendous stress. This wasn't some passing, fleeting prayer. This was a real agonising of the soul. may sound a little bit strange that he's talking about his death as a cup, but they had just celebrated the Passover meal, and this was a very ritual meal. In it, they would share a cup of wine at set places, and each cup had a distinct meaning. But there was one cup that they would never drink. It was right at the end, called the cup of Elijah. And what they saw was it was waiting there for Elijah to come, and Elijah would come as a precursor to the coming of the Messiah. But this would be the time when God would pour out his wrath on all the unbelieving nations. And so this cup really represented the wrath of God. And Jesus recognised that what he was about to face was to have that whole cup of God's wrath poured out on him. Now, we often focus on the brutality of the cross, and indeed it was a dreadful thing. In fact, even the Romans eventually banned it because they said it was too inhumane. Jesus did cry out in anguish from the cross, but it wasn't physical pain. It was, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" A cry of desolation. It's actually the beginning of Psalm 22, but if you read through that psalm, the writer is writing about the feeling of, "Why have you left me, God? I'm absolutely desolate." And this is what Jesus was feeling on the cross. The reason being is he was experiencing the punishment that each of us deserve. Now, in this world, we're surrounded by God. Even if we don't acknowledge him, we are surrounded by him. We can only love because God gives us the ability to love. The characteristics of God are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. If we were completely cut off from God, we'd have none of those. To be removed from God's presence would be experiencing complete aloneness and desolation. Jesus went to the cross and he took this on himself so that there is a way out for us. Now, the way out consists of our recognition that, Jesus, you did this for me. And then he offers us a new way of living, a way of relating to God that means when the time comes, we will not be cast out of his presence, but we will live with him when this life is over. John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life.
See the dawn of the darkest day, Christ on the road to Calvary, tried by sinful men, torn and beaten men, nailed to a cross of wood. Is the path of the cross. Christ became sin for us, took the blame for the wrath we stand forgiven at the cross. Oh, to see the pain written on your face, bearing the awesome weight of sin. your selfless love is the power